By now you figured out that just because you use AI to make your podcast sound better doesn't mean it sounds professionally mastered every single time. Hi, I'm Kevin Oyang and I'm the editor on a podcast called Just Shoot It. It's run by these two Los Angeles TV directors and they know their stuff. They have high standards. I spent the last 206 hours and several months coming up with a workflow that would give me professionally sounding mastered results every single time with the least amount of effort. I'm going to share that with you because it'll save you a ton of frustration and trial and error. Let's get started. So we use Riverside to do our recordings. And from Riverside, you can download a Premiere Pro timeline. Actually, for my first episode, I did edit in Riverside. Riverside is great. It makes things a lot easier, and I thought that by avoiding all this exporting and downloading, I could save some time. But using Riverside, I did actually get those comments that, hey, this person's too loud or too soft. And Riverside didn't really give me meters or ways to kind of assess what was really going on. With Premiere, I'm also able to do a much better job on color because I couldn't find any color tools in Riverside. We record our show in two parts, an intro and a show. And once we download it, I like to rename these files into something that's easier to remember. So for this one, I would rename it as Matt Intro Part 1. And I'll go through and do that for all the files, both in the intro and the show. The reason I do this is to make it easier to find in Premiere Pro. You see, Riverside renames all its files as Riverside with the full name, raw video, blah, 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 blah. But when I'm in Premiere Pro, I want to be able to see it easily. And that's what renaming it in this way does. And I'll explain more later. Once I rename all my files, I have something that looks like this. I actually use a script to do this, and in another episode, I'll show you guys how I used AI to help me write scripts, because I'm not really a coder either. With these files, the first thing I'll do is I'll take them into Audition. While Audition is loading up, I'll explain to you why I do this. I'm going to run this through podcast.adobe.com for voice enhancement. But I found that sometimes podcast.adobe.com's speech enhancer picks up little sounds and actually tries to correct them. So if one of the hosts on the show has their headphone volume so that their mic can barely hear it, podcast.adobe.com is going to delve into that and really do a good job of improving that voice, which at that moment I don't want to hear because I'm already recording it on another track. I'll show you that in a little bit. But the way around that is to bring that into Audition first and to apply dynamics processing to it. So let's take this file, and I actually have a preset for this, and I'll walk you through what the settings are. In denoise, I set it like this to 20%, and I choose this one so that it's focused mostly on the upper end of the noise. I do this because podcast.adobe.com is pretty good, and I'm just trying to get rid of some of the extra hiss. Under dynamics processing, this is the shape I use in order to cut out some of the noise and sound that we don't want to hear. So as you know, the way this works is if this was set up here, there would be no impact at all. It would leave the clip exactly as it is. When I drag this down like this, it means anything that is minus 40 dB and lower is going to get even lower. So that's what we're doing. Things that are already pretty low, we're going to make them even lower. And there's a way to speed this up even further. That is to create a batch process. So I'm not going to go through that right now. You can look that up online and I'll provide some links. But having a batch process, I can just drag it in here. And now I'll set my export settings. The way I set my export settings is with a post file of Aud01. So what will happen is Audition will export the file with the current file name and then add on to it Aud01. Hit OK. And when I run this, it actually runs pretty fast. If I were not to use this process, Audition wouldn't run these in parallel and would run a little slower. So it's actually pretty nice to be able to do it this way. So you can see here, these are all the files that Audition created. So this is how the name ends up. Orin Show Part 1, which is what I did when I renamed it. And then Adobe Audition added Aud 01. Now we're going to take these WAV files and upload them to podcast.adobe.com for speech enhancement. So if you haven't used podcast.adobe.com, it's a great tool to enhance the voice quality. It gets rid of echo and a lot of other background noise. It's perfect. It's pretty straightforward. You just kind of upload your files through this interface, or you can drag and drop them right here. I'm not going to do that right now. I don't have a super premium account with Adobe, so I'm only limited to 4 hours per day, and I don't want to cut into that. But I've already uploaded these before, and you can see it'll process it, and it'll give you a reading like this. It'll tell you that it's doing 90% enhancement on the speech and like 10% enhancement on the background. I have played around with these settings before, but I find it's just easier to just leave them as is, and that covers me most of the time. Then I'll just download these. Once you've downloaded them, podcast.adobe.com has gone ahead and renamed the files. So you remember we had already had files that look like Guest 1, Show, Part 1, Auto 1. Now, Podcast has added this ESV2 90B, blah, 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 blah. And all it's saying is V2 is version 2 of speech enhancement. 90p, that's the 90% that we saw here. And 10% is the background noise. So these are the files, and we'll take these into Premiere. So I've got this template I like to use, and I'll share a link to let you guys download the template in the description. But I'm going to import my media into this template. So we'll bring intro in first. And it's looking for the media because we renamed them. I struggled with whether it's easier to just not rename them at all, and actually it's easier to rename them and go through this process. So bear with me. I'll let you know that I also created a script so that it actually changes all this, so these steps are automated now in a script that I used AI to build, and I'll share that with you guys in another video. But so now we got to look at these files. So this one is Matt, and we are in the intro. So this is Matt intro wave. And this is Matt intro MP4. So this is Orin intro wave. And this is Orin intro MP4. Then I'll go in and I'll input the show. So this is guest wave. Guest MP4. Matt show wave. Matt show MP4. Orin show wave. Then I'll go in and I'll relabel these so that I know that this one is show and this one is intro. These reference the files that have not been processed, but I want to use the files that have been processed. And I also want to keep track of the ones that haven't been processed because we'll use both, and I'll explain that later. Now, it's very important to, at this point, save your file. In order to change the media out, I found it's easier to save this project as something else, and I call it sacrifice. Now that we're in the sacrifice project, I'm going to replace my media. So I'll right click on this one, reveal in project. I know this is the intro. I'll go in, replace footage. Now I'll go to where we downloaded from podcast.adobe.com. And this is Matt intro. This one I'll do reveal in project. This is Orin, we want intro. Then I'll go over to Show, Reveal in Project. This is Orin, we want Show. And I'll do that for the remaining ones. Okay, so now we replaced all the media. So I'm going to save this project or close it. And I'm going to open my original project again. Okay, so here we are back in our original file. The first thing I'm going to do is to go in here and color code these. These are the ones that are unprocessed. So I want to make sure that we keep track of that. And I like to label them brown. Now we're going to import the same sequences from our sacrifice project. And remember, these will have the different media in them. I'm just going to import the two sequences, intro and show. And you can see why it helped to label the tracks before. So the next thing we'll do is we'll bring this into a main sequence. And this is where the template part comes in. I have a sequence called Start here. I like to leave this one blank. So I like to go in here and duplicate this and then rename the duplicate 0 uncut sync. The reason why I use this template is because I already have some audio track mixer settings set up. So I'll show that to you right now. In the audio track, let's kind of walk through what we have as we go down the tracks. We've got Oren and Matt. These are our two show co-hosts. So they're always the same, so I have named them permanently. Then they will have anywhere between 1 to 3 guests on a show. So I have tracks for guest 1, guest 2, and guest 3. I have a track for music, sound effects, which we really don't use at all. I'll explain that later, but this is a track with all the voices recorded on them. And there's a reason why we do that. And there's a reason why I have this set down to 0 sound or minus infinity, but every time I open and close this, it goes back to minus 100, which is fine for me because that's good too. Then I have the same voice tracks, except I have an X next to them. These X tracks are actually the original unprocessed audio. There's a reason why I have them here, and there's a reason why I have the level set to minus 12. Audio 13 and 14 I don't use. And then I've got some submix tracks at the end. I have a compression submix, and I have then a final mix. And I will take you through that in a little bit. But I think the most important thing to point out is that these unprocessed tracks don't get compressed into the final. And there's a reason I do that, and I'll explain that later. But if we go through each of these, there's some effects. I've got a high pass set on these at 70 hertz, just to get rid of any hum or any rumble or any wind noise as someone brushes past by the microphone. I have automatic click remover. I also have denoise. and I have a multi-band compressor. This is just set to broadcast, and I don't touch the settings on these. But basically what I'm doing is I'm running a broadcast compressor on all the voiceovers, and all the voiceovers have been processed through podcast.adobe.com. Now, some of you might say, well, podcast already makes the sound compressed, so Kevin, you're adding a little too much compression, and that might be right. Like I said, I'm not really an audio engineer, so a lot of my trouble is that sometimes I'll notice that certain voice tracks will have the same power indication on the meter and sound completely different when you listen on different devices. So even though the meters will say they are at the same levels, I'll get notes back that, hey, this person's voice is too soft and this one's too loud, etc., etc. And I found that kind of compressing a lot solves that. And in the actual use case for our podcast, where someone's in a car where there's a lot of noise anyways because of the road and wind, or you're watching it, say, on YouTube, but it's in the background over cooking or something else, just having the voice levels be at the same level and consistent so that they don't really get too loud or too soft really enhances the audio experience for a podcast like this. I also run the same, except I add a dehammer on these unprocessed tracks, and I don't compress. So what will happen here is, you remember we set a dynamics processing on the tracks before we sent them to a podcast.adobe.com. So what happens is sometimes people's voices will drop off if they're going to comment like this, and you'll lose it. And podcast.adobe.com, and it's in our effort to make sure it doesn't pick up someone else speaking through someone's headphones, it'll also drop off a lot of little comments like this, or if I turn it away. And so that gets cut out. So the way I add that back in is by adding these unprocessed tracks, but at a lower level. And this will pick up little nuances like the hiss of the S as people trail off, and it just makes it a lot more real. So now let's go ahead and bring what we already imported into these. But before we go on, please be sure to like and subscribe this video. It helps me get it out and help more people, which is what I want to do. So I'm going to take our intro and I'm going to bring that into the sequence. And then I'm going to bring the show into this sequence. Now you recall that the unprocessed tracks start on track 9. So I'm going to drag these down to start on track 9. And then I'm going to get my process tracks. So the intro, and then the show, this can get a little tricky. See how this is offset by 1 frame, and I want to make sure we replicate that when I copy these over. Okay. So I'd like to give this a listen first and make sure I didn't screw up any of the synchronization.
It's on you from, it literally just keeps feeling that the night before the first.
And that sounds good. I mean, if I had screwed it up, you would hear, oh, fake it like this.
First day of shooting, he develops a case of psychosomatic blindness.
You would hear an echo like that because the tracks are slightly out of sync. Or in the worst case,
male director, so it was like a smaller list.
Hear a lot of crosstalk going on. So some of you might be wondering, why not just edit in Riverside? Because that's so much easier. And actually for my first episode, I did edit in Riverside. Riverside is great. It makes things a lot easier. And I thought that by avoiding all this exporting and downloading, I could save some time. But the interface I guess because I've been doing like Premiere Pro for like 10 plus 15 years or something, I'm just very quick in terms of getting around the interface and navigating to where I need to be in a very quick amount of time. So that's nice for me. And also I have more control over color as well as sound. So using Riverside, I did actually get those comments that, hey, this person's too loud or too soft. And Riverside didn't really give me meters or ways to kind of assess what was really going on. And with Premiere, I'm able to control it by compressing it. And I'm also able to do a much better job on color because I couldn't find any color tools in Riverside. But here I'm going to give you an example of what crosstalk looks like. So this happens rarely. I mean, this is probably the first time it's happened since I started making sure I processed everything through Audition and ran dynamics processing on it. But here, listen to this.
Wait, it wasn't a theatrical film? Like at that moment, did they already know that?
Okay.
Yes.
So right in there, I'll play it again. You can kind of hear, he's talking, but you can hear an echo of his voice. And if I go in and solo out this track here, this is what the offender is.
I did play what it got that.
Okay, so what's happening is that little tiniest bit of sound is getting through the headphones of another co-host and getting picked up, and podcast.adobe.com is doing its best to try to make that voice come through. So in this case, we would need to just go in here and silence that out. Then I'd make sure that here it's actually the host.
Yeah,
No, that's actually her talking. And then, yeah, see, that's actually the host. So,
And script.
Is the reason why it wasn't a theatrical film? Like at that moment, did they already know that?
that happens extremely rarely running it through Audition. But like I said, if you don't run it through Audition, it's probably going to happen a lot. And that was the problem I was having before. But what we're going to do now is we're going to create a recording with all the voices on here. We use that track in order to let Premiere go in and remove all the filler words like ums, ahs, and also remove all the extra silence. Okay, so I'll go ahead and send that to Media Encoder. I like to do it as a WAV file. I think the first time I tried this a few times, I would do it as an MP3, thinking I'll save some space on my disk. I actually ran into some timing and sync issues for whatever reason. Maybe I did it wrong, I don't know. But doing it as a WAV, haven't had any problems since. So we'll let Media Encoder launch and then we'll let that run through. I've gone and let it run and I've imported it back into our project. And now we're just gonna drag it into our timeline. And the first thing I'll do is I'll make sure it's not out of sync. So I'll bring this volume back up to 0.
They have like the special person out there.
Of my life, way more than I did for girl.
And then when I'm done, I'll turn it down. Now, because this track isn't actually heard, it's not gonna screw up your audio in case you do get it off sync, but it will make it hard to follow the transcript, which is what we're going to actually use this for. We'll right click on this and click transcribe. And I do yes for separate speakers. Although sometimes it doesn't really do a good job. It'll think there's 5 speakers when there's only 3, but still better than nothing. So I'll let that run, and this can take some time. So while that is transcribing, I like to go in and do the color correction. I'm going to assume you guys know how to do that, so I'm not going to walk you through it. But one thing I do want to point out is I noticed that my tracks aren't in order. So here's like Oren, here's Matt, and then over here I've got Matt and Oren. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to put all my tracks into order. I also like to color code all my tracks by speaker. It just makes it easier to track. Then I go in and do color correction. So because I've done this several times, I already have my color corrections done previously. So I'm going to assume you guys know how to do color correction. So I'm just going to copy over my color corrections, and that'll be that. So the cool thing is I'm sharing this template in the description, and it's got these layouts for having 2, 3, or 4 people on screen. But since we got 3 people on screen, I'm going to walk you how I do that. I've got a sub sequence for each of my speakers, Oren, Matt, and guest 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy Oren into his subsequence. And I'm just going to show you how the first one works, and then it'll be easy for you guys to figure out the other ones. But Oren, you'll see I have a 2-up and a 3-up. That's because in the intro, it's just 2 people. As they go through it, you got 3 people. So there's 2 people on screen or 3 people on screen. And it's easier if you kind of line up where these are supposed to be before you bring them into the all participant template. So Oren, I always have on the left side, and I created this mask here so I can see whether he's centered on the left side. And I'll just go in and I'll adjust his footage. To center him up on the left side. So there, and then I'll kind of drag through to make sure he kind of stays there because he moves around and his camera moves around. So that seems to be good enough. We're not going to use everybody on screen all the time, so it's okay if it's not 100% perfect. Now when he gets to 3-up, I want him centered over here. And again, I just kind of see if he kind of stays there, and yeah, he kind of does. It's good enough for this. Maybe move him over, scooch to the left. Then I'll go through and I'll do the same thing for Matt and the guest. Okay, now when I go over to the guest, it's just kind of important to remember where these breakpoints are. So the free up here starts at 32:28:14. When you go over to that into the main sequence, I can see that our guest starts 1 frame later. So I just got to pay attention to that when I set her track up. Okay, now we're ready to go into the 3-up sequence. And the way this works, in case you're interested, is at the bottom I've got a black video so that any gaps between here you won't see through to the bottom. And then each one has a track mat applied to it. And in the track mat, I have a shape. So if I turn off this track mat, you can see the shape. So that's the shape. So I've got a rectangle here, and then there's another white rectangle in the middle, you can imagine, and one white on the left, on the right side. And the only reason we use these subsequences first is because it makes it easier to handle the track mat. So if you know After Effects, you can move a track mat around and that's okay. And it does what you think it's going to do. In Premiere, if you move the track mat, you have to move the footage. So it just gets really confusing. So that when you align a person so they're in the middle of the mat, you have to kind of move the footage and then move the mat. By doing a subsequence, you avoid all that problem. So now I'll bring my 2-up and 3-up into my main sequence. And I'll make sure they're inside.
He was doing the layout. So then
there were younger people who were like, the domain name. And he goes,
It was a foregone conclusion.
Okay. Our text is transcribed. Sometimes what happens is you have to wait for it to transcribe, then shut down Premiere and reopen it. Otherwise, for some reason, the text doesn't appear here. So I found that that works. What you don't want to do is it's going to say, hey, there's like other clips in here that have not been transcribed, and do not click on this, because then it's just going to transcribe stuff, and it gets confusing because you have some tracks which are one voice, and then you have this all tracks which has all the voices, and sometimes you'll see both of them on there, or it'll get confused and not know what track to follow. But we want it to follow the all tracks. And that's because the next step is we're going to take out the fillers and the pauses and the spaces. But before we do that, I want to create a new sequence so that we don't lose the information that we've already created. So I'm going to duplicate this sequence, and I'm going to call this remove filler spaces. And the only reason I do that is in case I screw up, which tends to happen a lot. Okay, so now we're in the remove filler spaces. We're going to go over to this window called text, and then I'm going to click on this filter guy. I'm going to do, actually before I do that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do transcript view options. And this is the setup I use. So this one's checked. These three are checked. Those two are not checked. And I set it for 0.4 seconds, I find is what works best. And then here, we're going to come into here. I'm going to do filler words. And I'm going to click this delete thing. And then I'm going to click delete all. You have two choices here, extract and lift. The one we want to use is extract. And I'll just click delete all. And there's 369 filler words it's going to use. So you can see there's now 369 new cuts. So now I'll go in here and I'll do pauses. And you can see there's 681 pauses. And I'll just do delete and delete all. This can take some time. Okay, so now you can see we made another 600 something cuts, close to 1,000 something cuts. You will get some jump cuts. It's not much you can do about that. Primarily, I'm doing this for a podcast, and most of our followers and subscribers are on podcasts. So a tighter sounding audio track is more important than a video that looks absolutely perfect. So that's why I'm happy to go with the jump cuts. You might want to do something else in your case. Depends on what you're doing. Here, now I'm going to duplicate this sequence and call it edit. This is the sequence that I'll actually go in and do my edit in. So let's say you've now completed, you've gone through, you made all the edits you want, all the music's lined up, everything's looking great. Now you're ready to export that as a podcast. I like to go to a WAV file first, then take the WAV file and re-export that as an MP3. And mostly because I was finding that that process works better. For whatever reason, sometimes if I went straight to an MP3, things that sound great in the timeline end up getting weird, and I get some weird pops in the MP3. But if I go to WAV first, then in the WAV, I don't get those pops. And then when I go from WAV to MP3, there's no issue at all. Now, because we actually go to video also, the next step I go through is I go in and duplicate this sequence again after I do all my edits. And I call this one Autopod. To switch between my cameras, I like to use Autopod. Okay, if you haven't used Autopod, it's a great resource for doing a multicam edit. I find the settings that work best are as follows. It's standard, medium on the wide shot frequency, and then this is 3 speakers, 4 cameras, which is obvious because we got 3 speakers and 4 cameras. And then the delays, I use a half-second delay. I've gone longer, and that works too, but not as well. And I kind of think maybe shorter works too, but then it starts to look like it's just somebody who has never edited before and is just cutting right on voice, so it looks a little weird too. And I said ignore cuts less than 1.5. So then you just kind of click this. All video tracks must, okay. So one thing about Autopod is it doesn't like to have any blank spaces. So if you have anything, okay, so this blank space in the track here, it's got to be filled with something, even if it's a disabled track. So I generally come down here and just copy a disabled track. Disable this. Now, if you are doing a bunch of cuts and leaving some gaps, say for ads and stuff like that, you also want to do the same thing again to fill it with a disabled track. If you then can't figure out where did I leave those gaps, you can use this to kind of hop around in tracks. And I found if you select these, like if I wanted to find the next gap in V3, I select V3 and go sequence, go to gap, next in track. And there's something similar too with the audio if I turn that off and on, so you can play around with that. There's also another setting for sequence, go to gap, next in sequence. But I found that doesn't work as well, because if I have a gap just in a track, but another track covers it, then that won't show up as a gap. However, Autopod will say, hey, in this track, there's a gap. Anyways, so now we can try seeing if Autopod will take this. All video tracks must end in the same frame. So let's go check that out. Okay, so it doesn't like how these are staggered out here. So, you know, do this however way you feel is fit. I'm just going to cut these. If you needed to extend them and disable them, you can also do that. So now let's see if it'll do it. And there, so now I'll just let it crank away for a little bit. Okay, now Autopod is done, and this is what it looks like. You can see it's actually lifted the footage out when it does the cut. But fortunately, it saves this other sequence, which is a backup. So we already have everything that we needed that was uncut. Then finally, what I like to do is duplicate this sequence one more time. Call this final. And what I find is that because we tend to have spaces where we have no video, like we'll play music right at the intro, and then the music dips and we would actually have the speaker start. At this point here, I have no video because I've got just music playing, and we don't want to see the host kind of just getting ready and sitting there. So what I like to do is to go like this. I like to just put the thumbnail in there. You can put in whatever you want, but this is what I happen to do. I'm not in love with it, but it happens to work. And I'll drag this through the whole sequence. Yeah, I'll drag this through the whole sequence because we also have pauses. We have no video where I leave time for ad breaks. And this is a great thing to just fill it in. So I hope some of this is helpful for you guys. This is how I make a podcast sound professional consistently every single time with the least amount of time and effort. I've got another video which is coming out, which will show you how I've even reduced the amount of work that I have to do even less by using some scripts. And I'll show you how I use AI to build those scripts because I'm not a coder. Hope you guys enjoy this and find it helpful. I'm sure you have other tips that probably do it even better than I do, and I would love to hear your comments. So please comment below. Thanks a lot, and I'm Kevin.